Before you click send on that WhatsApp message, you now have to think twice and ask yourself, is what I'm about to send harmful to the person receiving it or harmful to their image? This is because the Cybercrimes Bill has been officially passed by Parliament and the draft legislation is set to be signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa. To help us understand what this means for the average South African citizen is Worldwide Works CEO Arthur Goldstuck. Arthur, good evening and thank you very much for joining us on the Newsfeed Late Night. It started in 2017. It's been a back and forth with a number of changes put on this bill. What does the final product look like as far as data that is sent on the cyber web to the next person and how it affects that next person?
It's actually 5 years in the making, but the last 3 years were spent on the specific provisions, whereas previously there was a debate around what else could be included and not. It for example, included issues around national security, and those were regarded as being close to censorship if they were part of the bill. So now the bill is very specifically about harm that people may cause with messages that they send. And there's three broad categories. The one is messages that incite damage to property or violence to property, messages that threaten people with damage to their property or themselves. And then the third is disclosure of intimate images, which is photos that might be of the person or appear to be of the person. Even made up photos, Photoshop pictures, where you put the face of someone on a naked body, for example, is included here because that is regarded as being the same kind or creating the same kind of harm as sending an intimate image of somebody publicly without their consent.
Yeah, that in a nutshell is some of the highlights that pop out here. But if we drill it down a little bit, Arthur, and let's talk about what is a data message that threatens a person or damage to property. What does it actually look like, and where would you have put this, and how does it then track back to you?
We've seen a lot of these kinds of messages on Facebook and Twitter in particular. We've seen political parties, in fact, inciting their members to take action against people who have offended them, and their members then threatening those people with harm, threatening them with violence. That now becomes illegal. It's fairly common on Facebook within conversations, not as public, but semi-public still. And then the third level is where it's personal messages, for example, on WhatsApp. So a lot of people are characterizing this as a WhatsApp law, but it's not really. It's about any kind of electronic message. So whether it's WhatsApp, email, Facebook Messenger, if you threaten someone via a message or send them images of yourself or of someone else that you feel are harmful or are going to impugn your dignity, then you can in fact lay a charge against them.
So a political party that would probably go on social media and any of them and say, such and such a company has been discriminatory or prejudiced against women, attack. That would be something that would now have to go to court.
Very much so. Of course, they couch these kinds of threats in very vague terms, and they get their foot soldiers to do the actual calls to action and the calls to violence. But every one of those calls now becomes part of that action. And if it can be seen by a reasonable person to be interpreted as a call to violence by a political party, then criminal action can be taken against that political party as well.
Yeah. There was an instance, I think, in South Africa when the address and details of the home of a particular journalist was made public online. And I think another one, a telephone number, a cell phone number of a particular journalist was made public. Does this bill cover that, and what does that mean?
Those specific examples are almost precisely what this bill is intended to cover, because strictly speaking, that was against the law. It was inciting to violence, and there are laws that cover it. But the problem is that you really had to fight with lawyers and a lot of funding to be able to get a court to push through a finding in that regard. Now it's very clear. Now there's no longer contradictions or ambiguities in the law. And also where the jurisdiction lies is now made very clear by this new bill, whereas previously it was very vague and it allowed people to get away with it because it was simply too much effort to take legal action.
Yeah. Now you're able to get a protection order against those messages. How does that work?
In the same way that you would get a protection order against someone who is threatening you with violence or has a history of violence against you. Of course, we've seen how protection orders often don't really matter if the person really is insistent on getting at you. But those protection orders now can also ensure that such content is removed from social networks and wherever they've been posted publicly to be deleted. Most social networks do have a policy and what they call community guidelines that prohibit the posting of these kinds of messages. Yeah. But sometimes they let an incredible amount of threatening language get through. And this will allow people to take action and also to legally require the social network to take down this kind of content.
Now, these are multinationals. I mean, some of them are international companies. Yeah, they have a footprint here in South Africa. So does that mean I can now take that protection order and go to Facebook and say, remove that post?
Exactly that. If you have that kind of protection order, Facebook has to take it as almost a legal instruction. And they do take those fairly seriously when it gets to that point. They take it far more seriously than you simply complaining that someone has offended you or threatened you, bearing in mind that the likes of Facebook and YouTube have a very strong presence in South Africa. They generate a massive amount of revenue here, and they wouldn't want to fall foul of the South African law.
Yeah. Now we live in an era of WhatsApp groups, and there is a whole lot of material and images, sometimes unwholesome images of public figures and politicians doing things that they're supposed to be doing in private, but they do them publicly, and their genitalia ends up doing the rounds on social media. What does this mean? What does this new cybercrimes bill actually mean about the distribution of that and those who are found with that content on their devices?
It's certainly covered in terms of the new law. WhatsApp groups are, in fact, amongst the most toxic arenas for spreading this kind of content and posting derogatory content. I've been part of WhatsApp groups where I've said that I find content that's been posted highly offensive. And the argument from the moderator of the group was that they don't want censorship in this group. But it's not about censorship. It's about respect and also about not impugning people's dignity and also avoiding offense where it will clearly be offensive to any reasonable person.
Let's talk then about the penalties. I mean, how severe are the penalties?
I haven't seen the exact penalties that have been stated for very specific transgressions, but generally speaking, the imprisonment can range from 5 to 10 years for general offences and aggravated offences up to 15 years. The fines obviously are alternatives to the sentences, but that's essentially what you could be facing is 15 years in jail if you do it and keep doing it and you ignore demands or requests to take down or desist from posting this kind of messaging.
Right. So then as a general rule, I mean, what is your advice to people on WhatsApp groups, to people on social media who post and repost all sorts of things that come on their timeline?
It's the same rule that I've always stated since social media first emerged, which is if you're not willing to put something on a billboard on a highway, then you shouldn't put it on social media either.
Arthur Goldstuck, very clear. I appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us. That's the CEO of Worldwide Works.